I challenge anyone, no matter how good you are with Google ads or Facebook ads, take something that would cost $200 to $400 and turn it into $16 million. It's very difficult, if not impossible to do. But with PR and press releases, because of the power of leverage, if what you're saying is very newsworthy and is a hot button, thing, it can sort of develop a virality to it and really go far.
Welcome to the B2B Digital Marketer podcast, a podcast helping you to end your struggle with digital marketing, helping you to pave a new and better path to target and capture your ideal customer. Each week, we teach you how insiders and experts debunk the dreary and become engines of innovation. Now, here's your host, Jim Rembach.
Okay, B2B DM gang, I'm excited because we're going to have hopefully some clarity that's going to enable us to do a significantly better job of really getting the attention, the attraction, and standing out that maybe you haven't been able to get before. It's been eluding you. And really, it's from something that's been around for a very, very long time, right? So hopefully you're going to be able to learn something about the old way, and then also about the new way, so it can make a difference for you. Because I have Mickey Kennedy on the show with us today. Mickey, welcome.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Man, I'm glad you're joining us today. I'm looking forward to our conversation. So if you could share with the B2B DM gang, how you're going to, really enable them to be better, at being a digital marketer that is generating leads and helping their organizations grow.
Right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about press releases and PR and how they have a place in marketing. So many, digital marketers don't think about PR or press releases. They feel it's antiquated or it doesn't work. And I can tell you that it does work, but you just have to do it right and strategically. And so many people take a very haphazard way of testing press releases and it not working. And the types of press releases they're doing are new hires or just a product launch. And it's all about you. And it's not about the audience that you're trying to tap, because you got to remember the journalist acts as a gatekeeper, and you want to create a win-win where you're providing content. The journalist says, this is a no-brainer. I should share it with my audience.
Okay, now that what you just even positioned right there has, a whole lot of depth and context to it. And quite frankly, there's a lot of things that I have as questions as a result. And in order to try to process this and make it, easier for myself and hopefully for our listeners and watchers, is if you could probably address the issue of why the perception of it being antiquated exists. So what are the causes and reasons for that?
I think that people know newswires as the dot matrix printer in a newsroom just spilling out content like the old AP wire and things like that. And I think that so many people are focusing on new media and social media or paid advertising that they don't think about PR. And the people who have thought about it and said, oh, this is a major product, we did a press release and it didn't work, just have the feeling that PR just doesn't work. And yet there's this whole industry around it where people are getting success. And, a lot of them are startups because they're very lean. They understand what's in it for the journalist. They generally come at it with a USP. They know what they're doing that's different than everybody else, and they are not afraid of putting that and positioning that in front of journalists.
Okay. As you say that, I started thinking about a statistic that I recently read, which is along the lines of, if you look at, and I think it was a global statistic, it said something to the effect of the amount of staff that exists in newsrooms today has dropped by 30% over the past 10 years. And so if I'm thinking about that and in connection with, in conjunction with the fact that they probably have to put out more news than they ever had before, I start thinking about how they may even potentially be relying, on press releases like they haven't before. How do you see that playing out?
Well, I see anything that you're doing to make the job of the journalist easier, like basically coming at them with really strong articles already almost ready to go. All they have to do is put their personal style on it and massage it. Focus on the story, because that's what so many journalists do. They will take a press release that historically has been all facts and figures and build an anecdote or story around it. And so if you can sort of pre-digest that and come up with some anecdotes or stories or clients or case studies, you're going to make it easier for them to make that transition.
Okay, so then almost like saying, I want to say, well, we're already doing that in our blog posts. So
Right.
what you're saying is that, and this maybe was that whole antiquated comment that you were making and where we are today and how to take advantage of it, is a press release isn't like it used to be as far as, on, today's date at this time, this company stated this, and therefore, and it goes on, and then I have a limited number of characters. You're saying that's not what we're talking about, is it?
No, but that is 80% of the press releases I get. And that's very frustrating for me, because these people are losing opportunities where they could be doing press releases more strategically, and press releases that matter, and press releases that will result in articles. We did a press release last year for a dining bond initiative. It was sort of modeled after war bonds, and it was designed to help your favorite local restaurant that was probably closed during the pandemic. And you would make a donation. The money would go directly to your local restaurant immediately. They didn't have to wait for it. And you would basically get like $100 value and pay $50 for it. And, it came out at a time where there was a lot of negative news. The news media were looking for something positive, and this just sort of scratched that itch. It got over 150 articles: Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, all the food magazines and trade publications picked it up. Generated millions of dollars in revenue, and all from one single press release. And I challenge anyone, no matter how good you are with Google ads or Facebook ads, take something that would cost $200 to $400 and turn it into $16 million. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to do. But with PR and press releases, because of the power of leverage, if what you're saying is very newsworthy and is a hot button, thing, it can sort of develop a virality to it and really go far. That's an extreme example. But I have clients every day that do surveys and studies. And I have one client that does between 40 and 60 surveys a year. They cover mostly the technology sector, but lots of little verticals within it. So they will create a study for each little micro vertical and get it out there. And they generally get anywhere between 8 and 16 articles written about it. And these are unique articles. Every one of them's written uniquely by a journalist. They may have taken the meat and potatoes that was there, but they've developed a formula that works for them, and it's asking questions that matter right now, and also putting in some great quotes as to maybe a surprise result. I think right now is a great time because there's a lot of uncertainty in a lot of industries. We don't know if we're going to another second lockdown, what's going on. But if you had a survey right now in your industry where you asked your colleagues out there what they felt about the market right now, their market, whether they're going to increase or contract their own marketing spend, and what they're leaning towards as their go-to right now, there are people that would find that fascinating data, and anybody can do a survey like this. And I've helped a lot of clients that consider themselves, I'm not newsworthy at all, and yet I've generated tons of articles for them because they did a survey. And I remember one, it was an auto repair shop in Pennsylvania that was looking for auto industry trade publications to link to them because they had a new website. Their old website was tied to the Yellow Pages, and I don't know if they quit hosting it or they quit advertising, but their page was gone. And they were told by an SEO person that if you get links from auto industry trade publications, you'll rank quickly and fast. And so they came to me and I said, the only way you're going to get any attention being a local auto industry repair shop in Pennsylvania is to do a survey or study. And so we came up with some really fascinating questions. I always throw in a couple oddball questions. And in this case, it was the one that went really viral. And it was like, what's the strangest thing a customer left in their car while being repaired? And, every answer was unique. It was a field where they could write a couple sentences, and we got lots of great stories out of that. A lot of the auto industry trade publications, about 10 of them, picked it up and picked and choose what they thought were the most interesting results. And within 3 months, they were ranking #1 in their area, which was their goal. They also got newspaper pickup, including their local newspaper, also ran it and did very well. And, their big hangup was they didn't know who to send the survey to, because they're like, I only know of 2 or 3 other auto repair shops, and they're my enemies in town. And so I told them to reach out to a trade association, a smaller one, the better. And so they went to the Independent Trade Association for Auto Repair Shops, and they sent it out to their members, just the URL. They did it through social media and an email drop, and over 800 people responded to the survey. So it was a very rich survey with lots of data. Really, if you get over 100 responses, that's all you need for the average survey. The news doesn't really care very much, but in their case, they got quite a bit. And the articles were all about, you won't believe what people left in their car at the auto repair shop. It was less about numbers and statistics, and it was more about anecdotes and stories. And sometimes that can happen if you ask the right questions, but there was also a lot of good data that was in there as well.
Okay, so that's a good story, and thank you for sharing that. 'Cause I think it puts it in real perspective. And then also, like you were saying, is that, well, I'm not newsworthy, I'm not noteworthy. Well, really? Do you think this small shop in Pennsylvania, isn't? I mean, well,
Right.
Guess what? Okay, so also, I think you bring up an interesting point on something that I had read associated with what gets picked up, what gets shared, what gets, especially when you start talking about from a PR perspective and a news perspective, is data. When you look at, what is the most attractive, I've heard that it's data that's going to get picked up faster than anything. I mean, have you found something different?
No, data is great. And, if you do a survey or study, you own the data and you're the author of it, which makes it really good. But that being said, you can collect data that's already publicly available, and nobody's put it in an interesting way with an interesting story and perspective on it. So, there are people who just don't feel comfortable doing a survey, but they'll collect some interesting data or piggyback on someone else's results, and then they will provide analysis, including some really great quotes as to why this is important and why it's important now, especially if it's a recent statistic that came out. And, so you don't have to necessarily own the data. You don't have to own the respondents of the survey or anything like that. You just have to be the person willing to put yourself out there and to release the report and the press release.
That's a good point. Okay, so the other thing you talked about was, which I would interpret as is consistency. And I mean, heck, man, but I'd rather get on TikTok, Facebook, and all that and post, and therefore go viral that way. But I think you're giving us a very different perspective upon that, because I think for most people, when you start talking about social shares and engagement, those numbers are dropping significantly, especially in my world being B2B, right?
Right.
It used to be that I'd put something out there and it would get more views, likes, and comments than it is today. And I think one of the main reasons is because, especially in B2B, is that, as I say, is everybody and their mother is now trying to get attention and stand out. So they're all doing content marketing, they're all doing posting, they're all doing blogging. And I even said before we started recording is, I don't know, talking about the source, I don't know, but I heard that there's currently like 1 billion blogs in existence today, but yet we only have 7 billion people in the globe. Do we really need 1 billion blogs, right?
No.
So what that means is that there's a boatload of noise.
Right.
So
I think
so
the
let's
thing
talk
about
the consistency piece. Sorry.
I think that, being consistent, building a PR campaign, I always say, if you're going to try PR, commit to a campaign of 4 to 6 releases. Try to do as many strategic releases as possible. If you have a natural milestone in your business, like a new product or service or something that you're doing that's really cool, you definitely want to incorporate that in there. But, try and push yourself and do a survey or study. Try to find some public data that's out there that's interesting, maybe even something that came out very recently that you can sort of put some analysis on and build out some really fascinating quotes. Quotes are the easiest way to guarantee that you'll appear in an article. The thing about it is, if you say something in a way that's really compelling and a journalist paraphrases it, it's lost. That the beauty of what you said. So I get so many safe quotes that don't mean anything. They're just filler. And it could have been a quote that was, a journalist could build a story around. So if you have a really compelling analysis and a quote that just, really hones in there and spells out what's going on, then you can survive a managing or supervising editor's red pen when it comes in trying to cut stuff. Because a lot of times, if you have a safe quote and a journalist is like, I've never heard of this company, why are they in here? And this isn't even a good quote, they'll just remove you from the story, even though you may have inspired the story. And that's frustrating, but you didn't, do the test of, is my quote really strong and compelling? And, so that it would survive an editor's red pen.
Okay, so as you're saying that, I start thinking about, my wiring and my abilities and capabilities. I'm sorry, Mickey, not everybody can write a good quote. Not going to happen. And going back to your 80 to 80-20 scenario of, 80% of the people send me the old school traditional type of PR release. And that means if I was even just to take that, and I dare to say the number's probably worse, 80% of the quotes I get are pretty bad,
Right.
And I would dare to say it's probably more like 98% of the quotes you get are pretty bad. It's not easy to put together a compelling quote. So how do we get better with that? Or what do we do if we're just like, I'm not wired that way?
Well, I mean, you can always use a writing service. Here at eReleases, we provide that. But I would say so much of a press release is pretty easy to write. It's third person. It doesn't have to be compelling. You just have to get the facts and figures. I only ask that you put a little thought and creativity in the headline, the opening sentence, and a quote. So it's that's the only place where you should have some art. And if you don't know how to write a compelling quote, write a quote that's not compelling, but gets your message across. Then go to a friend and say, could you jazz this up for me? Or maybe you could just make it sort of your creative writing exercise to how could I rewrite this and make it stronger? More active verbs, more authority, all of those things would work really well. And, I think that it can be very overwhelming, but if you just break it down into a really great headline, a really great opening sentence, and making sure it has a really great quote. And the only thing the rest of the press release has to do is provide the facts, the who, what, when, where, and how. It can be very simplistically written. And so I would say, I think most people have that in them. And if not, lean on somebody. There's got to be a colleague, a friend, someone that you trust, a spouse even, that could, help you jazz up a sentence or two. It's not a lot of work. You're not looking for paragraphs. You're just looking for a sentence or two.
Okay. So help me with this. When you start talking about, quotes, and you start talking about being able to stand out and get that coverage and traction. A lot of people say, hey, do some news hijacking, take some things that are relevant today, use that and incorporate that into, your press release and the things that you're going to post and all that. And because it has a higher likelihood because it's top of mind, right?
Sure.
But then I start thinking about, well, maybe there's some things that, it's just too early to kind of talk about those things, right? Hey, we don't go there yet because it's just, it has too much sensitivity around it. Also, there's some things that, no, you don't want to do that. Don't want to go there at all, because that's not going to create the type of PR you want. If I start thinking about all these things, can you kind of help us understand what works, what to avoid,
Right.
and how to go about that process?
Right. So the example you had about newsjacking, where you jump on a trend, if you're first, you can maybe make it work. But after a little while, everybody and their sisters releasing press releases on that topic generally in many industries. So you can do it. And the problem is so many people are doing the simplistic route. They're like, I remember the breach at Target, the credit card breach years ago. I saw press releases for 6 months that still talked about that. And they were all the same. We're a security consultancy. We have solutions for this. And here's a quote about, how bad this breach was. And I am saying that if you approached it as saying, hey, a few months ago, we had this big Target breach. It was bad. A lot of big corporations are getting their stuff in gear. And but what you don't realize is most people interact with small businesses, be it the pizza shop down the road or a small retailer, and they have a credit card terminal on their counter and they don't even know whether they are at risk of the same breach as Target. And I'm telling you, here are some of the risks right now if you have a credit card terminal on your counter. And then you provide some tips and resources and really great quote. I'm just like, whoa, you just layered that newsjacking to a place that's very appropriate to small businesses. And I can see a lot of journalists saying, this is an approach I haven't seen before. And it's still riding the coattails of something that happened, but you've enhanced it and added some layers and maybe even some narrowed focus towards it, where you're focusing towards small businesses and carving that out. And I think that those opportunities can work really well. Again, it comes easy for me because I'm of a creative mind. And so I can sort of, look at these things and try to dissect them. But you can do the same thing. You had mentioned that there's some things you don't want to talk about in your industry. And I've helped clients, we call these industry blind spots, where nobody talks about certain subjects. And what we've determined is sometimes they don't talk about it because they're just blind to it. And sometimes they don't talk about it for a reason. And so we did a cybersecurity person who said, I have all this analysis that the average website, including Amazon and all these other places, have vulnerabilities. And there's no way to fix it as of right now. And so we released a press release about it. And he got a lot of industry pushback from people saying, keep your mouth shut. We all know this. But like you said, there's no solution. So if you're just going to scare people, all you're doing is pissing a lot of people off. And so that didn't work well. But I had another client that was a local carpet company in New Jersey, and they told me their biggest problem is marketing, and they have to market to combat the big box home improvement stores. And so we did a press release talking about their marketing problems and what they do and how difficult it is. And it got picked up in over 10 floor trade publications. We continued to do press releases on marketing after that, and they continued to work. Now, we didn't get 10 each time, but over a 5 or 6 month period, we got like 30 articles across like 12 publications. They also got their local newspaper, and a New Jersey state magazine picked them up as well. And they put all that together, and because their customers don't read floor trade publications, but they put it in this big binder they called the brag book. And every time they went to a person's house to give them a quote, they made sure to go through it with them and show them that they've been nationally recognized by all of these publications. And they say, we're probably not going to come in the cheapest, but I guarantee you, we know who's going to install your carpet. And the big box home improvement stores don't know what company is even going to show up next week, more or less even tomorrow, to your house. And so our employees are salaried. They work here for decades. We treat them well. We rarely ever have to come to someone's house and restretch the carpet. We do it right in the beginning. And the carpet padding that we use is really top notch. And that's where most of the wear happens with the carpet. And so they said that it's the same thing they've always been saying, but coming after going through that big brag book, they started converting 20% more of their leads. And I think it's this implied endorsement that happens when all of these publications write about you, because it's true. If I was getting carpet and it's like, yeah, I'll save $400 by not going with this company, but man, the company's been recognized in dozens of industry publications. They obviously know what the heck they're doing. They have salaried people. They know who's coming into your house. That matters to me. And $400 is not a lot more to pay to get good quality work. And so they just found that it helped their credibility, so that the same argument they always had started working more and more.
Well, and that's very helpful. So, but for me, it begs the question when you say, all right, we're talking about the sales process. I'm at I have my brag book, and we can do the same thing even for an online business, right? I've got all these things and where we've been, have these attributes and mentions and everything. But then the other thing that you talked about is leads. Well, if I'm thinking about press release, I start thinking about, well, how do I get leads from a press release? Because we started having an attribution scenario. I mean, the newspaper's trying to get, their traction, and they're trying to improve their, organic search and their, relatedness and all that. Their each scores for Google, and all these other ones who are posting too. So how do I get my organic, scoring up so that I'm generating those leads and can get to that sales opportunity?
So what you're looking for is, I don't care about the press release. Let it rank very well on PR Newswire or whatever newswire it's out there, because my goal is not that press release or even a duplicate version of that press release. There's a whole cottage industry of syndicating press releases. So the same press release appears on multiple websites. Complete distraction, doesn't help you at all. What we're looking for is a unique article and hopefully a link that would link directly to you. So whatever it is that you're announcing or positioning out there, that it resonates with people. We see a lot of startups that have a unique product or service that they're offering, get articles written about them, and the traffic they get from those are buyers. Rarely does a person click on a link in an article about a Kickstarter or something that's new, and then go to that website and open a new browser and say, well, can I get it cheaper on Amazon? They want to do business with the company they just read about. So they're it's really good traffic and really good leads. That being said, you also have to make sure that anytime you're positioning yourself out there, that you are sending them or directing them to a page that you feel does a good job of serving as a lead magnet or something where you capture a certain amount of the traffic. If you're an e-commerce company, it's pretty easy. You send them to the product page you want them to buy. But if you're a service-oriented business, it might be sending them to a white paper about this issue that you just brought up in the press release. An example of the small business, credit card breach, you could point out that, we have a free 24 audit report that for small businesses to determine if they're at risk, and you just direct them to that page, and all of a sudden this is a valued resource. All you're trying to get is their information, and maybe that's the audience that you're trying to reach, small businesses.
So it obviously has to go into your overall strategy, and you have to think of, I talk about the before, during, and after elements, right? You have to think all of that through. It's not just as simple as writing that article thing.
Right. Yep. Because I'll tell you, it does happen where some people get media attention and they just didn't have a page to send people to other than their homepage. And it didn't result in sales. It didn't result in leads. So you have to take into account, what kind of page could I create that serves me as far as trying to capture leads, but also is considered a resource that a journalist would be willing to share that link, because you don't want to have the article written and not link to the page that you want them to. So you got to sort of build that page in mind as providing a great resource in exchange for their information.
Yeah, very good point. Okay, so there's another thing that you had talked about that I think is really important for a B2B digital marketer, growth marketer, someone who needs to generate the leads, while building the brand kind of happens, but ultimately we really have to, and I think you kind of talked about, we have to get leads. I mean, it's the only way we're going to get to that sales opportunity. So if I'm thinking about that, I started looking at all of the things from an online marketing perspective and digital perspective that I could do. There's a lot of them. I was actually going through a map the other day and looking at the complexities that they exist. If I'm a B2B, if I'm a B2B2C, there's all kinds of iterations and variances, but you need anywhere from 5 to 7 or 8 experts that now have deep domain expertise, right? So there's a lot of things that we need to do. Especially if I'm talking about Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, if I'm on LinkedIn, I mean, it's like, you can no longer just get by with the person who kind of just does it all, the jack of all trades, because it's gotten so difficult. So then I start thinking about, where does this fit in my mix, right? Do I do this before that and this before that? Because I just had this conversation with someone earlier, and he's like, well, I'm doing all of these things, but I'm like, well, have you done that first? And he goes,
Right.
well, no. I'm like, well, think about that.
Right. Well, I always tell people one of the interesting things about my company is I started in 1998. So I went through the dot-com crash. We went through the housing bubble crash, and those were my best years. I kept my mouth shut because I knew people were hurting and doing bad. But what happens is people all of a sudden have to cut off the spigot of marketing that doesn't work. And so they've been spending a lot of money on whether it's Facebook or something else. And they just know that for every dollar they're putting in, they're getting 80 cents back. And they're just like, we keep tweaking it and changing it, but we just can't do it. But they continue to struggle until the crap hits the fan and they just can't afford it. And so they're more strategic with their spend. And they know that if they do a good press release and get some leverage, they can get, a factor of 100 or 1,000 in return. And so it is interesting that people seem to return to the press release when the market goes to crap and they're really having to watch their dollars. And I would say, there's a reason for that. And it is the leverage effect that happens. It is the fact that with some thought and creativity, you can leapfrog your investment, and you don't need much of an investment. You do need the time. And, is it possible for you to carve out some time to learn how to do strategic press releases and then just commit to doing one a month or one every other month? I think it's something that you should test and try. It works for people, but I do understand some people, I'm just not going to see them until there's a market recession or a problem. And it's one of those quirky things that people don't think about us. They keep meaning to do it, but they don't do it really until they can't afford to do anything else.
Okay, whoa. I mean, I think you just put, a lot of people who are doing a whole lot of, Facebook marketing and training and all. I mean, wow. That's pretty bold, man. Okay. And I'm sure you have the data to support it because you're seeing it all happen. And like you said, you've kept your mouth quiet, but I'm like, that's very compelling. So it also too, when you said that, I started even thinking about how all of those platforms, the cost to advertise is continuing to rise.
Right.
So
I think another thing to keep in mind is that with any type of marketing that you do, you want there to be an ROI. And the thing that I hate is that with PR and press releases, the ROI is not so obvious. But that's why we sort of get drawn to the extreme examples of when and PR, like the millions of dollars that was created for the Dining Bond Initiative. But I've had clients who one said, the only place that picked up my press release was one trade publication. But just to let you know, we got a call today from Australia, and they're interested in buying one of our plants. And the size that they're looking for starts at $37 million. And so he's like, we are ecstatic. And he's like, I could go for this kind of failure anytime. And so it's just a matter of putting in perspective what you're looking for and what kind of return you're doing. I also think it's important to realize that a lot of journalists don't like covering large companies. They don't. You very rarely read features about the new Microsoft Office. The reason is Microsoft can afford to advertise around the world. So why would we ever do a story for them? But they love to profile and feature small businesses, small startups, unknown companies, and they like being seen as a curator. And people are like, oh, this is a really good writer. He really discovers a lot of cool tools and resources and companies and things like that. So, so many people feel I'm just a small little company. And there's an ego thing where they just feel like I'm not valid. I'm not important enough. And what I'm saying is many times those are the people that do really well. I had one client tell me how they spent the previous Thanksgiving. They had canceled their Thanksgiving dinner, but invited the family to come over to help do fulfillment in their garage. They said, we got so many orders and we had to get them out. And so that's how we spent our Thanksgiving. And we ordered pizza or Chinese food. I can't remember what now, but I told them, that's the story. Put that anecdote in a press release. And they did. Inc. magazine wrote about it. And it was that anecdote that they picked up. And I think at the end of the day, people love stories. People love things that they can identify with. And there's a lot of startups that have done either stupid things or had some really crazy experiences. Canceling Thanksgiving is certainly one of those things that falls in there that a lot of people could relate to and it resonates with. And so those are the opportunities that get missed by so many people. In this case, this client wanted to appear bigger than they were in corporate. And I was like, no, appear human and it'll work. And they did for them. They did really well.
Oh, that's a good story. But unfortunately, they had to cancel Christmas and New Year's because.
Right.
Well, I mean, okay. So this has been very, very eye-opening in a lot of ways. And I still want to get just a little bit granular. Okay. If you can help me a little bit. Like I had mentioned, we'll just take my B2B example. I've got LinkedIn, I've got Twitter, I've got Facebook, which is that's kind of like the core three that a lot of businesses, put effort into. And most oftentimes, if they're doing it at all, they're doing press release for, like you said, new product or product updates or new, hey, we just got this big new customer type of thing. And that's pretty much where they relegate, press releases to. But if I'm looking at, my investments, if I'm looking at, the budgets that I have, if I'm a B2B marketer today, where should I potentially be pulling, some of this allocation of resources and efforts to, and where should I be putting it in context of press releases?
Right. I would say whatever you're spending on that's not working, allocate from there. Now, I have played with YouTube advertising. Everybody says it's hot. I can get cheap views, but I can't convert them to save my life. I have wasted $20,000 or $30,000 in test after test after test. And I'm sure that there's stuff that you're doing, the ROI just isn't there. And I would say that's an easy place to carve out $3,500 to do 6 press releases, having them sent out over the wire, as well as emailed to subscribing journalists, and do a campaign that's based on strategy. I put together a free course for my customers on press release strategies, taking into account what works. The survey and study is one example. The industry blind spots another example. But I would suggest anybody who's considering doing PR to look at this this masterclass. It's a video that's less than an hour, and see your company through that lens of a strategy, and see if you can't come up with 6 or more ideas for a PR campaign. And it's at ereleases.com/plan, PLAN, and it's completely free right now. I've been told to turn it into a course, but it's like, I don't have the time or energy for that. I'm just going to make it available for free for now. And I would suggest anyone who's looking at PR to start with the approach of, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it strategically. And I'm going to avoid the new hire press release. I'm going to avoid the press releases that don't usually get media pickup. And I'm going to focus on the ones that do. And I think if you do that and you do 4 to 6 releases, you're going to have really good success. Not every one of them is going to be a success. And I usually say a success is 4 to 8 articles, unique articles that are out there. And that's a really good standard, I think, for a newsworthy press release.
And we'll also put a link to that on your show notes page at b2bm.com. And you can do a search for Mickey, and Mickie Kennedy. We'll also put it under and tag it with press release as well. So Mickey, if I'm thinking about again, I need to go back to what what I want to, put into people's minds is I'm still hearing that you got to be consistent. You can't this when you, and I almost have caution when I start in marketing, when I start thinking of the word campaign in the context of campaign, is that, people look at it as, well, something that I do for a period of time and then I stop. I don't, even based on what you were talking about, 20 plus years of experience at doing this, looking through all of, these downturns in the economy, this has been consistent. And you've even had a peak when and it has had an inverse relationship to the economy, right? Is that we need to be thinking long-term on this.
I agree. I think that there are so many opportunities for you to, create your own news, get it out there. Some of my clients feel like a survey is a one-off thing. And then I just tell them to look at my client and that's doing 40 to 60 a year and learn from them. They are very astute as to what's going on right now in the world of tech. And so they will position each study to be very timely, and they can just continue to do several of these studies. And it just works. And it's because they've mastered what people want to know right now, and they've become the source to go to for that.
Mickey Kennedy, I've had fun time chatting with you today. How can the B2B DM gang get in touch with you?
ereleases.com is my website. All my social media is on the lower right. LinkedIn's a great place where I actually do check my messages. I have someone who handles my Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and stuff like that. So they will sometimes circle back to me, but LinkedIn's a great way to reach out to me. I do encourage anyone who's open to trying press releases to start a chat on the website or call in. There's no salespeople, there's no commissions or anything like that. We just have editors who answer the phone, and they're willing to talk to you, walk you through the process. And even if you have a press release you just want us to look at, even if you don't use us, you can send it to us. We'll usually get back in a day or so with some thoughts about how we feel about the press release and how it might do.
Mickey Kennedy, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, and we wish you the very best.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Go now to join the B2B DM gang in the B2B Marketer LinkedIn group, where you can connect with other B2B DM disruptors and get access to our B2B DM cheat sheets, checklist, and guides. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, please help by going to iTunes to rate, review, and subscribe. And share the show on all of your digital platforms. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode. And always remember, you can automate your lead capture, but you must lure your lead.